Hello. This is something I said I'd do for the stuck at homers. So you all know who you are. If and apologies if that means nothing to you. But I recently shared this image here with the group and said I'd put something together as to how I got there. And this is it. I've finally got a chance to sit down and do that. So what I shall do is my plan with this isn't to go into very low level detail about things such as masking and layers, and applying textures and blending modes, because I'm going to make the assumption that you've got an idea of how that already hangs together. You've got an idea of how to use that. If not, feel free to ask me in the comments of where you see the post for this. Quite happy to do that, but I mean there are some really good tutorials out there with the likes of Flern and Piximperfect that can already do that. Happy to point you in the direction of that. But I think for the most people in the group, it's not going to be needed. I'm going to guess that most of you already have an idea of where to go with that. So this isn't going to be a very in-depth tutorial. I'm just going to go through it sort of in a step-by-step process, right from planning the image. when I say planning, there wasn't much. It was about a 3-minute sort of thought exercise, going through taking the picture, what I did to how I took the elements of it of the picture, and then how I edited it in Photoshop. And as I say, it's going to be quite a high level thing, but I'm sure it'll explain exactly how I did it. And this is how I did it. There are lots of ways of doing these things. People will do them their own way. You feel free to ignore everything I say and get it done the way it works for you. So so that was the sort of finished thing that I put in this image here is the finished product that I put into the group. It started off over here a little bit. You can see that that's just one of the panels, and I'll mention that when I put this together for a panel competition for the club. So that's why there's a triptych there. It won't be a triptych in the panel competition. That'll be separate images, but you get the idea. Right, yeah. So let's talk about taking the images. So here's my starting set of images. There's a lot more than that, but here's my starting set of images. Before I go through them, let's talk about actually taking them. So camera settings, that kind of thing. So how did in planning this? How did I set it up? So I've done a few of these kind of things. So it didn't take much planning in my head really. But the camera was put on a tripod because I wanted to take each of the pictures in exactly the same position, so it gave me less work in Photoshop, and that'll become more apparent as we go through this. So yep, set the tripod up, and this is where I started actually. Let's start there. This was what I was thinking when I started. So when I set it up, I focused on the pot there, and I can't even remember what the settings were. It would have been about F8, I think, or something like that. I had the camera set on manual, so I set it up on manual in my back garden on a sunny day. F8, whatever I think it was something like 80th of a second, something like that, as a shutter speed. Manual focus. So once I'd focused on that, and I think I used auto to focus on it because I'm lazy, but I then flicked the camera into manual focus. Oops, excuse me, I'm drinking a tea and it's just repeated on me. Do apologise. And the reason for that is I was going to be taking a lot of images, and I didn't want the focus to be shifting around the place. And that's the reason why I was also in manual settings. I didn't want, if the camera's starting to think about things like, oh, I've got to adjust the settings, and then go and adjust the aperture on me, and therefore the depth of field and that kind of thing. So tripod, so it didn't move. I did use a wireless shutter release that I use in my landscape photography for the long exposures, because although it was just on a shutter, but that meant I didn't have to touch the camera. There was going to be no wobble. Manual, entirely manual, so manual settings, manual focus, so the depth of field didn't jump about, all that kind of stuff. And then I took each element of the image in exactly where it was going to turn up in the picture, so I didn't have to move things around, or although I did, but that's another story. And these are my starting images. So this was the pot I took a picture of, and then of course I wanted the arm to be growing out of it. So this is my son Tom, and he volunteered in inverted commas to model for me. And what I tried to do was get his arm pretty much exactly where that pot was, and as though it was coming out in each of the axes. So the X, Y, up, down, left, right. So I'd have very little to do, and when I come to the editing, you'll see how that can be a real advantage. And not only that, it also means you haven't got to start playing about with the perspective of it and trying to when you're compositing, because it's there. That's what it's meant to look like. Makes life a lot easier. So yeah, these are the starting images. This one is as you can see, is the bud from the first of the set of images. This one here, when Bridge wakes up. Oh, there we go. Now this is the severed thumb and the secateurs. There. I did have to move these ones across. They weren't quite in the right place, but not a very simple process when you get into Lightroom. This one, I didn't use this one in the end. So my thoughts behind this one was that I dropped some blood, and this is fake blood we had lying around, because that's the kind of house I live in. And we dropped some blood, and I could then, cut that out and put it wherever I wanted. There's a few of them. But as you can see, there's the part, and here's the hands as they come out. So I used this one twice. This was the fully bloomed one, and I also used it then to cut his thumb off. So, and that's sort of, this next one is the flower mid bloom. There were some of the pictures I took to make the composite up, and let's quickly zoom through those. I think the further back, yeah. So things here like, we'll go on this one. There's a patch of fake blood there that we had, as I say, we have in our house. And again, I had to move that. It wasn't quite in the right place, but my planning wasn't as great as I'd hoped. I will say that on this one, with this one, what I did is I took several pictures, because I thought, John, John? Who's John? I've got my son's called Tom. I've got no idea who John is. So Tom may have moved, or it may not look quite right. So I took a series of these images, and I moved the pot from the right to the left, so that if it didn't quite work out, I'd got one that was near as damn it. Which was lucky, because the first one I set up and carefully measured didn't quite work out. Which is why this one is in the middle of the sequence rather than at the beginning. But there we go. So I think there you go. There's the images, and there's the sort of preparation that you go into the picture taking. And I think the takeaways are tripod, manual settings, manual focus, and just click away once you get there. Yeah, just don't touch that tripod, and life becomes a lot easier when you get to the next bit. So, and the next bit is editing. So I brought my layers over to Photoshop, and here you can see the first thing I did was decide on a crop. It's unusual for me to go with a square crop, if I'm honest. This was for a panel, as I say. So I thought maybe, but also I think the square crop sort of helps with the subject matter. In this point, it keeps the pot on the third. It puts the nice little sort of diagonal arm up into the top third, the central top third. So yeah, no other reason than that. You may disagree, and I don't mind that. That's, this is my image. If you do it different, you go ahead and do it different. That's what it's all about. So yeah, started off with my sort of base layer, if you like, of the pot, and what I'll do now is I'll sort of go through the steps I took to build the image up, and I did this layer by layer. So let's put the arm in. There we go. So here's the arm. And this is the first one. You'll see that I've got this group here, arms, and I put them all together so I could, out of the one image, I could create out of the one. It's not one image, it's several images, but out of the one PSD file, I could create pretty much all of my images. Really simple. So clearly, I needed to do some masking on this, and this is where the planning really helped out earlier. Let's have a look at my mask. You can see that it is far from delicate, far from detailed. There is some detail here around the pot. You can see that where it needs that detail, but where the arm comes up over here against the background, because we're not moving the camera, because we're not changing the camera in any way, the background is going to be the same whether the pot is there or whether my nipper Tom is lying there with his arm stuck up in the air. And in fact, you actually want to bring more of the background with the arm in, because the shadow is cast against the fence. And you can just see it here. So we brought that with us. That saved me having to put a shadow in. I just used the shadow that was there. So that made life a lot more simple. So we got several of these to build the picture up, or to build the panel up. And this is the one, the gruesome one, if you like. I put that all in one group, in a group again. So there's different components to this. There's that you can see the fake blood there, just on his thumb. We'll just make a note on I will come back to that in a minute, because I didn't use one of the fake bloods in the from the images that I took. It didn't work out quite as well as I'd hoped. So I drew this one in, used a colour down here, drew it in, put some embossing and some shading on it, just to try and make it look a bit more realistic. And that's how I built that blood up. And you'll probably see there's a couple of layers to make it work. Here's, let's go alt on that. Here's the thumb and the secateurs from the image earlier. I did have to move it across, but again, masking that out, I didn't have to be very accurate, because it's on the same kind of surface. It's on exactly the same surface. It's on the wall. So where you don't need to be that, where you don't need to get carried away, don't do it. It saves you a lot of time. And finally, there's this. That's his arm, and you can see I've masked out his thumb there too. I didn't really, by the way, nobody called Child Protection or Social Services. His thumb is still on there, and I'm happy to provide evidence of that. So yeah, so that's to build the image up in its components, and then of course there's the finishing around things like color grading, and I know how to do texture. This texture I took here. Let's have a look at it on its own. Oops, select the right layer and I'll be able to change it. So normal and 100%. That's an image I took out. I took that image actually with somebody else from the group, Kerry. We went out to Highbury Hall in Moseley to take some pictures, and we took some interesting pictures, but I think we both found lots of textures that we ended up taking pictures of for composites such as this. But anyway, so there's my texture. It's of a metal. It was a rusted metal door, and I desaturated it for the purposes of this. So let's reduce our opacity. It's about 45%, I think. Yay, there we go. And I can't remember what I used. Overlay. There you go. That'll do for now. So that's the texture. Now, if I'd wanted to be clever with the texture around the arm, I'd have had to have duplicated that texture in against all of these separate images, just to make sure that any masking I had to do around that texture stayed with the arm. But I left it quite sort of as a global effect. call me an imperfectionist if you must, but or lazy, one of the two. So yeah, and then I did some color grading. That's the overall effect. Well, let's just turn them off one by one. There was no science in this, by the way, when it comes to color grading. This was very much a case of experimentation. You know, it was I'm going to use the word art for lack of planning in this and for lack of having a plan. I knew that I wanted it to be horror-like and horror blue as one of our adjustments here, one of our color lookups was always going to be used. This one's Candlelight Cube, and I started with that. I don't know why. I think it just sort of gave it a more slightly monochromatic feel. I think the colours suited it better. Then I introduced this blue to really give it a horror feel. And I introduced a black and white layer here. And you notice it doesn't go black and white, and that's because we look at this. I set the blending mode here to luminosity. And that's so that I could play with the colours a little bit. And the one I was really interested in, if I'm honest, and there's a number of ways you could do this. You could do this with selective colour and that kind of thing. But I put this up just to have a play, just to play with the colours. We've got the blues in there. We've got the oranges and the reds and yellows. And I wanted to have a play with them. If I just ease back on this, you can see that these drips here that are actually orange, I turn those into a nice red sort of colour, as though it's more blood, and it also helped me sort of even the whole palette out. So yeah, that's I'm sure you know that trick. It's one that you've all used before, to use a black and white layer in luminosity mode to affect the colours and how bright they are, and to color grade your image. One thing I will say about the layer mask on this, I'll just turn it off for a second, just so you can see the effect it had on the pot. You might like that. I decided against it. I thought, yeah, I like the difference it made to the colors, but I wanted to just tone it down a bit. So I did that with this layer mask here. I turned the density down. So if I go 100%, let's have a look. There you go. So no effect at all. The entire effect. But I ended up about there. Yeah, just a trick if you've ever used it. I'll put a gradient map on it again. Not just because I felt the highlights and lowlights needed a little balancing. If you look at the histogram, you've almost got that perfect normalized curve. That isn't always what you want in an image. However, I just felt that without it, it was lacking a little something. I felt it was nearly there, lacking a little something. Then once I got that, I went back to my horror blue. I stuck another one on top. And that was good enough for me at that point. I felt that I'd got there. There wasn't a scientific way in that. I sometimes start out, with one of these edits thinking, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to get there. With this one, it didn't happen like that at all. So I find very few images are damaged by a vignette, and I went for a particularly harsh one on this, as you'll see. I could have eased off on it, and it's personal preference. A lot of people will say, oh, Gary, you really should. I like it how it is, and I'm going to leave it like that. I just used, to get that vignette, there's a dozen ways of doing it. With this one, I just used a curves layer. Really squashed the highlights and the shadows into each other, and then I applied a layer mask, and you can see there I've got this is where I applied the feather. I applied this layer mask, just using the ellipse tool and the selection. And if I do that, you can see, yeah, that's what it looked like when I finished. You can obviously put a feather into your, as you draw it, put a feather into the ellipse. But and that's how I used to do it. But I like the fact that by you doing it this way, you can adjust it. You can adjust the feather in here, and I much prefer to do it that way nowadays because I can change it later, and it's easier to change. Again, you can change the density if you really want to. There's not much point on this one, and I'll show you why if I do. It just makes it all dark. You lose the effect entirely. So that's how I got my vignette. The last thing I did was add a key line, and that's this layer here. It's a really simple key line. If you ever add key lines quite a lot, I've got an action to do it. Yeah, that key line action. And all it does is something very simple. I might as well create it now just to show you. So create a new layer. You can fill it with any color. I shall fill it with black, just so you can see it. There we go. Then I open up the blending style. I look for a stroke, and it's not going to be that one. I can just set it up if it is. Oh, certainly not that one. All right, let's have a look at it. So size 21, I'm going to bring that down to 4. I'm going to put it inside. I'm going to make it white. Whoosh. There you go, nice and white. Obviously, it can be any color you see, and there you can see the key line on the image already. That much is done. Then I come to the you've got your up here. You've got, when you're talking about your layers, you've got your opacity and fill. If I remove the opacity, obviously the key line goes with it as well. But this fill is ace for this kind of thing. So what fill will do will remove everything but the blendings, but the layer style. So the layer itself, the content in the layer has gone, but it's left behind the layer style. You can use that for all sorts of effects, like putting text with embossed text on your image that doesn't have any fill, just the shape and the contour of what it is, but all that kind of thing. So that's how I set my key lines. As I said, well, I don't do that much. I just click on the action to do it. And I think that brings us to the end of how I put this together. Any questions? Feel in the group. Just feel free to stick them underneath the post. Happy to discuss anything you think I've skipped over, and hopefully that gave you an insight into how I put these together. I mean, feel free to also discuss your ways, and if you think there's an easier way of doing something that I'm doing right now, please tell me. I like cheats. I like it to be nice and easy. And there we go. That's your I'm not going to say tutorial. That's your guide on how I do it. I'm not going to offer you a tutorial. I don't think I'm the right guy. But yeah, I'm going to reiterate. I really didn't chop off my nipper's thumb. Please don't call the police. Thank you.